Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, and we are back with another exciting tutorial. And in this episode we are going to talk about Kubernetes best practices. So this will be a very interesting video and very useful for your day-to-day usage on your production environment. So what we are going to talk about in this episode is about setting resource request and limits in Kubernetes. So this is very important because if you don't configure your Kubernetes configuration files like deployment or services where you create your pods, right? So if you don't set that correctly with the proper resource limits for CPUs or memories, those kind of things, if you don't do it, then your system is going to crash, your pods are not going to create correctly, your performance will not be correct for your system. So we really need to understand the resource limits in Kubernetes. So when we talk about resource limits in Kubernetes, there are two terminologies which you need to understand. One is called request, another one is limits. So keep in mind these two terminologies, like even if you're going for any DevOps interviews, this will be one of the main questions which will be asked, like how you set your Kubernetes applications usage for your CPUs or memory, or they will ask like what is resource limits or CPU limits, memory requests in your Kubernetes manifest file. So what we will see in this tutorial, like how you can assign a CPU request and CPU limit to a container so that you can control the usage of your container. Okay. So what we will try to understand first is what is the difference between request and limit, right? There are two terminologies. So let's talk about a little bit about what it is, so you can clearly understand what it does when you give this configuration in your manifest file. So the first one is like a request. So let's consider I'm going to give a value for request like 0.5 for CPU. So what does that actually mean? So what that actually means, like when you set CPU as 0.5 in the request category, it says that your container is guaranteed to get that CPU limit. So let's consider in your node it have around maybe 4 CPUs, okay, but you're setting your configuration that for this container you have to set like 0.5 or which is also can be written as 500 milli CPUs. Okay, so what it will do is like it will make sure that this container is running on a node which it can allocate 0.5 CPU. So it will not send this pod to any other nodes which it cannot allocate this much of CPU. But this node can have other remaining CPUs which it does not has to allocate to this. So let's see, there is one more terminology called limit, right? So what this limit says is like, for example, you're setting the CPU as 2. So what is it means, like even though this container is guaranteed to get 0.5 CPU, but it can goes to a limit of 2 CPUs. It can never goes beyond that. So what it will do is like this container try to use this CPU. So 0.5 is the minimum it will have it's guaranteed to have that. So it can go up to 2 CPUs. So if you keep the limit, if you don't keep the limit, it can go as much as the the node have it, right? Because you're not setting any limit for it. So that is the overall purpose. Like now we will see how you set this request and limit in your manifest file. So I will show you the manifest file, how to write that, and we will also try to create our pods in our Kubernetes cluster. So you will see how this will impact if you make some changes, and how this values for CPUs will be shown when you try to get the details from your Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so these are two things which you need to be very clear. A request means it's the guaranteed value of which you're going to set, and the limit means that the maximum it can go, so it cannot go more than that. Okay, so let's talk about this configuration. Now if you see, this is a sample configuration where I have put the resources, right? So in the resources I have two options, one is limit and one is request, right? So under requests, you can see CPU 500 milli CPUs, right? And or it can be put as 0.5, and the limit is 1, right? So this container will definitely get 500 milli CPUs, and it can go maximum up to 1 CPU, right? So now let's talk about, if you see on the right table, I have given a 4-column table, right? Now this configuration of limit and request, right? So you can have 4 categories, right? One is like, you don't put any CPU, or you don't put any value for limit as well, right? So it's in the bottom right corner. If you see this this point, like if you don't have no CPUs and no limit, right? So if you don't set that, what will happen is there is no guarantee that your container will get this much of CPU, right? So it's a random, the Kubernetes itself will allocate something based on the nodes availability. But what is the problem here is there is no control of the usage, right? So if your application is going to heavily utilize the CPUs, your whole node is getting used for it, your application performance will be impacted. So there are a lot of issues going to happen as part of if you don't set the CPU request or limit. So it is one of the best practice in Kubernetes that you always define your resource limits in your manifest file. So you can limit your CPU, you can limit your memory. We will talk about the memory also later, in a different tutorial. It's almost the same one. I just want to show you a sample based on the CPU first, so then we can talk about memory as well. So there is a difference between CPU and memory, because CPU is like compressible, memory is not. So but no issues, it's almost the same approach we are going to do. Okay, now we see that if you don't put the CPU limit or CPU request, you're always going to have some challenge here, right? Now let's consider a scenario like you have a CPU request and CPU limit, right? Both are defined. That is the best case scenario, where if you put a request, that means you can guarantee the CPUs as per the request. So whatever you put it in the request, you are going to guarantee that is going to allocate to your container, right? Now whatever is excess, like there will be an excess amount, like for limit, you have put something excess, so it's above the request, right? So the excess CPU available is available, so that the container need it will can use it, but it will not never goes beyond the CPU limit. So the container cannot go more than that what is set in the limit. Okay, now if you don't have a CPU request, let's consider you only put CPU limit. What does that means? Like Kubernetes will automatically set the request to the limit. That means if you put only as one one CPU as your limit and there is no request, by default that one CPU will be the guaranteed one which will be allocated to the container as well, but there will be no excess CPU available to further utilize it. The same way, like if you have no CPU limits, but if you have CPU request, what will happen is the CPU request, the guaranteed CPU as per the request will be allocated, but the excess CPU available, for example, the node may have excess CPU, but it's not specifically defined for this container, right? So Kubernetes itself will decide based on the priority, and it will be given to whichever the containers as needed. So there is no limit specific for this container is set there. So it's all completely based on the Kubernetes system. Now let's I hope this makes it clear for you, like what it is a request and limit, how it does your system will work when you put the limit in your manifest, when you put this request, if you put together, if you don't put both of things. So there are challenges based on that, right? So you need to follow the best practice for Kubernetes to achieve that. Now let's get into our actual demo, so that we can try to run some pod and we can see what happens. So before getting into that, I would request you, like if you're new to my channel, or if you have not subscribed to my channel, click on the subscribe button. Also like my video, share, give your comments in the feedback in the comment section. Now if you see, I have the Kubernetes running on a Minikube, so you can have different kind of setup. So this is just for learning purpose. I'm showing it. You can also use like play with Kubernetes, or you can use your cloud system to create your Kubernetes. I also shown like K8As, right? K3D Kubernetes. So different ways you can use it. So you can set up your own Kubernetes and you can do these things whichever I'm showing. Okay, so first of all, what we will do is let me show you the manifest file. So what we are going to talk about is a simple pod manifest file. Okay, so this is, as you see that it's API version v1 and the kind is a pod. It's you can also use like deployments where you have container specification that also you can set. So but this is a simple pod where I'm going to give a meta name, and using a namespace it's not mandatory. So if you want to use a separate namespace, you can define it here itself. Now you have the container details, so I'm going to use an nginx image, and what I will do is I'm going to set the resource limits, right? So I'm going to use a limit as 1 CPU and the request as 0.5 CPU. Okay, so what will happen is if I set this, the CPU will be default mandatory assigned, guaranteed assigned as 0.5, but it can go up to 1 based on the usage. Okay, so what I will do is I will copy this, I will go to my system and I will create a file pod test.yaml, and I'm going to paste this. Now I'm going to save this file and I'm going to apply it. So before that, you need to make sure that you need to have a namespace, which I've used it. So if you see, I go to kubectl, get ns, you can see I already have a namespace called kubexample. Okay, if you don't have it, you just need to create using kubectl, create a namespace and give the name. Okay, now I'm going to apply this pod file, YAML file, so it's going to be pod test.yaml. Now you can see it has created the pod. So if I go to kubectl, get pods, and it should be under our namespace cube CPU-example. It's a typo here, so let me go and correct that. Now you can see the pod has already created and running. Okay, if you don't have the image for nginx, it will take some time to download it. Now what you can do is you can try to check the CPU utilization, right? So for that, what you can do is kubectl top pod, and it should be the pod name, and it should be namespace CPU example. Okay, so you can use top command, like in Linux you use top command to check the CPU, right? It will take some time for this pod metrics to be available, so you have to wait. There is a possibility like you may also face an error relating to the metrics is not available or enabled if you're using Minikube. So what you can do is you can also run the command to enable the metrics. So in case the metrics are not enabled, you just run Minikube add-ons enable metrics server. Okay, so for me it's already enabled. So if you don't have it, you will get that error, like if the metrics server is not enabled, you'll get message like the metrics server is not enabled. Here the case is like it will take some time. You can see now it has already used the CPU. Now you can see it has used till one core, right? So it's almost like whatever we have, it's used only 1 millicore. So you can see it also shows the memory, but for what we are talking only about the CPU. So it has only used 1 millicore. Okay, so what we have said is around 500 millicore because the usage is currently not it depends upon how the container is using, right? So what I can do is I can do a little bit change in this YAML file, so that I can try to push this container to use a little bit more CPU. Then we will see how much it can use. Okay, so I will remove this. Now you can see it's 0 because it's not using anything. So what I will do is I will remove this pod. So let me delete the pod. Okay, now what I will do is I will also remove the manifest file, so that I can edit it a little bit with the different parameters, so that I can force this container to use more than what it is set. So we'll see how much it shows up in the usage. Okay, now if you see what I have done is I just put an argument, so that I'm trying to push the CPU to use 2 CPUs. Okay, whereas the limit is only 1. So I'm trying to say to the container that let's try to use more than zero point 0.5, which is the guaranteed one. So then let's see how much, whether it can go to 2 CPU or it can go to 1 CPU. Okay, because it in our as per this one, the maximum it can go is 1 CPU. So let me copy this, and I will remove the file, pod test file. Then I will also create a new one. Then I will insert this content into it. Okay, now if I apply this again, the pod is created again, right? So we can see the pod, so it's getting created. I think there is an error. Let's see. Crash loop back. Let me see what is happening. So you can see it's trying to have some issues with the image, nginx image, right back of restarting failed container. So let me see what is happening. Okay, so maybe I can also try with a different image. Now what I did is I just changed a little bit this pod test file. So I just changed to a different image. So I just used the stress image so that I can try to use this argument to push the CPU. Okay, so it has created the pod as well. So if you see, the pod is running, and if I go to top command, you see where is our top. Yep. If I go to the top, you can see it will take some time for the metrics to come. Now if I use the top command, you can see it has shown a different details, right? Now it's trying to get the CPU core to the maximum, because we have one CPU. So it's all it's almost like it's almost using the complete the CPU core, right? So but it cannot go to two core, because we don't have that much limit. So the limit is only for one CPU, so it will go maximum to that. So that is what it's happening now. So now what we can also see is, like for example, now let's consider this scenario here. Okay, so let me see the nginx image. Let's consider it now. What I could see is, for my this node, if I go and check the CPU, you can see the maximum it has around how much is there. So you can see it has only 2 CPU, right? So it's I have maximum of 2 CPUs. So let's try to put this one has or maybe 4 CPU, and I will also put the request as 4. Okay, so maybe this one 5 and this one has requested 4. So it's definitely need to guarantee it for 4 CPU, right? So let's see what it happens when you do that. Before that, let me delete the current pod. I don't want to retype the thing, so I'm just trying to scroll the previous command so we can use that. Okay, because I'm using the same same namespace, or I don't want to run the type whole command again, because we are all everything in the cache, right? So now that is deleted. So let me go and create a new file. So pod test1.yaml. Okay, and I'm going to put this content over here. So our our CPU limit is 5 and the request is 4. Okay, so let me use this, and I will try to apply it. kubectl apply -f pod test1.yaml. Now let me see what is happening. kubectl get pods -namespace CPU example. Okay, now you can see it's pending, right? So what is the reason? So let's see kubectl get logs and this pod vq. Okay, let's So what we need to do is we need to give the namespace as well. So you need to kubectl log CPU demo, and it should be namespace CPU example, right? It looks like there is no log file, so let's go to kubectl describe and CPU demo, right? Or CPU demo, and it should be under namespace CPU example. Okay, now you can see, it's not creating the pod. Why? It's because it says nodes are available, one insufficient CPU. So the reason the pod is not able to create is because the limit and request what we have set is more than what this node have it. So in this case, this pod will not be created unless it finds a node which can guarantee that this container can be assigned with 4 vCPU. So 4 CPU count, right? So that is what we put in the request. That is the guaranteed one, right? So that is where this all process of what we are showing, like whether we can set the limit and request. So based on that is what the Kubernetes can assign these pods into the respective nodes. So this will be a really helpful part of your Kubernetes configuration. So when you write your YAML files, please make sure that you set your limits correctly for resources, whether it's CPU or memory, and you need to make sure that these best practices are followed. So that is all for this tutorial. I hope you got a clear picture on what is CPU request and what is CPU limit in Kubernetes, and we also show you how you can write it in your specification for container in the manifest file, whether it's a pod manifest or it's a deployment. So the configuration is going to be same. And we also talk about what is the difference when you set CPU request and limit together, or if you don't set it together, what is guaranteed, what is the maximum it can assign when you set its limit. So all those things we had discussed. I hope it's give you a clear picture on when you are trying to run your Kubernetes applications, so that you can will not face any performance problem. You cannot cause any throttles on your system, like highly utilization of CPUs, or causing a lot of issues there. So this would be a very useful video, I hope so, and I would request you to give your feedback into the comment section, and please share it with others if you like it. So thank you for watching.